There are a few things scarier in the world of naval history than the eldritch horror stories cooked up by French shipyards known as pre-dreadnoughts. In general, ship design got a little weird during the 19th century as everyone tried their best to cook up the next best thing. This naturally led to some weird designs, be it the strange boot things that the British invented, these borderline American things that look like they're an inch from sinking at any moment, that somehow one got to the Philippines, or these. Now some may say Messena is the ugliest, but allow me to introduce her half-sister, the Carnot. Welcome back to 5 Minute History, the weekly series where patrons choose the topics. This week, as part of a month dedicated to French history, we are examining the crime against sight that is the battleship Carnot. As the Victorian Age came to an end, the new Europe, dominated by the old powers of Britain and France, and the new powers of a unified Italy and Germany, saw the beginning of an arms race. Naturally, this race, in a time of colonial empires, was at its fiercest at sea, and the British, the masters of the ocean since 1805, set about keeping their lead with new ships such as the Royal Sovereigns. France, recovering from the failure at Sedan and the end of the Second Empire under Napoleon III, entered into its own expansion program known as the Statute Naval of 1890. Fearing isolation and being left behind the growing fleets of Britain and Germany, France sought to build its fleet quicker, and this led to some, shall we say, interesting design choices and production choices. Unlike many foreign yards that emphasised uniformity across all classes of ships, the new French project allowed for different naval architects to produce different varied designs around common requirements, similar displacement limits, and main armament calibers, and armour protection. 15,000 tonnes was set as a broad limit, but political and budgetary pressures forced designers to reduce displacement to around 12,000 tonnes as a compromise. That had significant consequences in practice. Yes, you heard me right, every single shipyard in this class could build whatever they want provided they reach the basic of the individual design parameters. And yeah, this could only go well. Carnot was laid down at the Arsenal de Toulon in July 1891 and launched in July 1894. Like most other ships of her time, she was powered by twin vertical triple expansion steam engines through 24 water tube boilers. This arrangement gave her a top speed of 17.8 knots, which for 1894 was not great but not terrible. Her hull measured approximately 114 metres in length, with a beam of 21.4 metres and a draft of 8.36. These dimensions proved sturdy enough as a platform for heavy guns and thick armour, but also contributed heavily to stability problems, an issue that was shared across most French pre-dreadnought battleships from the period. This is because the hull featured a distinct tumble home, a pronounced inward slope above the waterline, designed to increase the firing arcs of broadside guns, but it also exacerbated roll and seaworthiness. Issues became the order of the day. Like many of her contemporaries, Carnot had a high forecastle and a lower quarterdeck, which gave her moderate seakeeping in rougher waters. These are all issues, by the way, that would come back to bite the Russian Navy in the behind pretty badly, because their designs took a lot of inspiration from these French warships. Carnot's armament reflected the transitional influences of late 19th century naval thought, sporting 2 large main 12-inch guns in single turrets, 2 large secondary 10.8-inch guns on sponsons, and 8 tertiary 5.5-inch guns in smaller single mounts. Yeah, it also keeps going up until like the 5th or 6th layer of guns too when it comes to small weapons. The arrangement of the main guns with secondary guns was intended to maximise broadside firepower, but in reality it just made fire control harder. And this is before we get into the issue that the primary and secondary guns were similar in size, which made ranging even more difficult. The ship development came right at the time that the torpedo boat began to become popular too, and because of this the Carnot also carried a suite of quick-firing guns including 65mm, 47mm and 37mm weapons, as well as 4 450mm torpedo tubes, in case they got close enough to torpedo anyone. Carnot's armour was composed of nickel steel and featured a main belt of over 300mm thick amidships, tapering at the lower edge. This belt extended the length of the hull, and there was an armoured strake just above it to enhance underwater protection. Her main turrets were protected with up to 380mm, while the conning tower had up to 230mm of protection, and the deck was approximately 90mm thick. This level of protection was competitive with many contemporaries, and the French sort of had a bit of a thing with their armour schemes, where they would create an intricate series of compartments to place coal bunkers along the armour belt to form another layer of armour. Sea trials began in 1896, and shortly after Carnot was commissioned into the service in July 1897. Initially assigned to the Northern or Mediterranean squadrons, her duties consisted mainly of fleet manoeuvres and training exercises, typical of most pre-World War I navies. In 1897 to 1898, she participated with other French and Allied ships, including those of the British, Italian, German, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian navies, in a strange multinational task force assembled to intervene in the Cretan uprising against Ottoman rule. From 1900 to 1906, Carnot regularly shifted between the Northern and Mediterranean squadrons, taking part in annual manoeuvres that tested fleet tactics, gunnery, and readiness of naval personnel. In 1907, she was moved into reserve status at Toulon, and to be honest, this is a frightening reflection of just how fast naval construction was moving, that this relatively new ship was already reaching obsolescence in the face of newer vessels and evolving doctrines. At the outbreak of World War I, in August 1914, Carnot was completely obsolete by contemporary standards, and she had been laid up in Brest. She did not see action during the conflict, as newer dreadnoughts and pre-dreadnoughts from the Corbeil or Breton class were preferred for frontline service, while intermediate ships were often relegated to secondary roles such as coastal defence, convoy escort or training. After the war, Carnot remained on the Naval Register until 1922, when she was formally stricken and sold for scrap. Her long life, despite limited wartime use, was characteristic of many pre-dreadnought ships that survived into the 20s, because the resources to scrap them earlier was constrained by post-war austerity and really just wartime needs. When compared with her contemporaries, the Carnot reveals both the strengths and weaknesses of French naval engineering in the pre-dreadnought era. Her armour and firepower were adequate for the period, but they were flawed. Stability issues and the use of a mixed caliber in her main battery were significant limitations, because as the main guns would fire out, and the secondaries would fire out, they'd throw up splashes which would confuse the gunners and make it very, very hard to range find between the two different calibers of weapons. Even before the advent of the dreadnought battleships in concept in the early 1900s, British and German capital ships tended towards a more uniform main battery and greater focus on seakeeping and fire control. Only take a look at the British Lord Nelson class to notice how much more uniform its main battery was, and even it had the same issue with the ranging. Carnot and her sister's biggest legacy is how they represent political compromises, much as strategic planning. The lack of standardisation among the French battleships built under this program made logistics, training and maintenance a nightmare, compared to other navies that adopted more uniform classes. These challenges foreshadowed the reforms in naval design philosophy that would soon dominate with the all-big-gun dreadnought revolution, where uniform battery calibers and standardised machinery, not just across classes but types of ships, became vital. There is a distinct reason why, after all, that the British super dreadnoughts kept using the uniform 13.5-inch gun when the 14-inch gun as built on the Congo class was right there. Thank you all for watching, shout out to the patrons, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you all next week with another 5-ish minute video.